He used his official position and thereby got himself mistresses. The dark side of Lavrenti Beria's personality. Greetings. Today we will talk about the statesman and party figure of the USSR Lavrenti Pavlovich Beria. And at the same time, we will consider the question concerning his love affairs with girls and women. Is it true that in the list of mistresses, Beria listed more than 200 representatives of the weaker sex? Why Lavrenti Pavlovich often traveled the streets of Moscow with guards and paid attention to the Soviet ladies. How the statesman acted in case a girl or woman suddenly became pregnant. And what Beria answered during the trial when he was charged with unlawful acts against the female sex. Be sure to watch the video to the very end. It will be very interesting. An exemplary family man or not at all? You are certainly no stranger to the personality of Lavrenti Pavlovich Beria. This man held quite high positions in the USSR. In addition to the fact that Beria was a statesman and party figure of the Soviet Union, he also represented the interests of the General Commissar of State Security, was in the rank of Marshal of the USSR, and was in the status of Hero of Socialist Labor. During the years of his activity, Lavrenti Pavlovich was on good terms with Joseph Vissarionovich Stalin himself. Let's say more. Most sources tell us that this is the best friend of the chairman of the CPSU Central Committee. In general, we can be proud of such people. But in reality, not everything is not as simple as it may seem at first glance, because Beria's personal life is full of scandals and contradictions. Did you know how Lavrenti Pavlovich met his future wife? The man, you might say, purely by chance, met Nino Gegichkori in Georgia when she faced a difficult life situation. The woman in the late 20s of the last century arrested a relative. Then Beria agreed to help, and in gratitude asked for privacy with Gegichkori. Then followed the wedding between the newly married couple, and after a while, the son of Lavrenti Pavlovich, Sergo Beria, was born. Of course, on the account of seclusion, there are two generally accepted versions. The first of them tells us that there was a physical impact on the part of Beria. It is quite natural that there can be no question of any mutual consent. But the second version says the opposite, and Nino Gegichkori herself assured others that everything was consensual. Just a woman at that time, as has already become known, was in a difficult situation for herself. As for the model family man, in the person of Lavrenti Pavlovich Beria, the situation is as follows. Yes, before going to the place of work, the man necessarily spent time surrounded by his family. The morning began with the fact that Beria had breakfast with relatives at a common table. And after work, he did not go anywhere. Only when Lavrenti Pavlovich had to get into a car and drive with security guards outside his home began the love affairs of the statesman of the USSR. The most real Harem Beria. Tell me honestly, are you surprised by this arrangement? In the sense that Lavrenti Pavlovich found himself countless mistresses. Yes, not without abuse of his official position. That's why Soviet ladies couldn't cross a civil servant. It is hard to believe, but in the list of mistresses, Beria listed as many as 229 girls and women, and the most different ages and social status. The list was kept by a man with the rank of Colonel of State Security. It turned out to be Rafael Sarkisov. To get the whole picture in front of you, let's do the math. In the very first list, the Colonel counted 39 female names. Then followed the second list, which already had a lot more, 75 female representatives of the female sex. Finally, Sarkisov recorded the names of Beria's mistresses in the last third list. And here the data is impressive, 115 people. Here comes out more than 200 Soviet girls and women who had seclusion with Lavrenti Pavlovich himself. Regarding the age category, it follows that Beria could spend an evening with a girl from 18 years old. For example, he had a connection with a young student who at that time was studying at the Faculty of Foreign Languages. Plus, Lavrenti Beria regularly looked out for socialite ladies. Suffice it to mention the actresses and ballerinas who were in the center of attention of the civil servant. A vivid confirmation of this is Nina Alexeyeva, who had an amazing talent and even played the flute directly under Lavrenti Pavlovich. Also with Beria at one time secluded and Soviet actress Tatiana Okunevskaya. It was she who wrote the book Tatiana's Day, which was published 45 years after the death of Lavrenti Pavlovich Beria. And of course, not without ballerinas, which were admired by many statesmen of the USSR. One of these girls still told the public about ties with Lavrenti Pavlovich. However, there were good reasons for this. It was Beria helped to solve the question of the girl and her family man associated with housing. And then the ballerina decided to elementary thank his assistant. Scheme of action on the city streets. So, let's still return to the most important question. So why Beria, together with his personal guards, traveled the streets of Moscow and paid attention to the Soviet ladies? Here, everything is very simple. It turns out that this way important persons were calculating agents and spies in the face of female representatives of the female sex. Beria had some degree of flair and could immediately pay attention to a suspicious person. And then it is a matter of technique. A girl or woman stopped, asked to introduce themselves, and then scheduled a meeting with her in the office. All that was left was to give the address and wait for the scheduled meeting. Representatives of the weaker sex at the first meeting realized who was in front of them. Not surprisingly, they followed all the instructions and did not cross the statesman unnecessarily, especially Lavrenti Pavlovich Beria himself. Naturally, in addition to clarifying all the circumstances, there were actions that did not relate to the main topic of conversation. Beria simply could not resist a woman's charm. That's why he secluded himself with girls and women in a mature way, especially given the fact that the workplace were and young students and actresses and ballerinas. It is logical to assume that after such a connection, the lady could get pregnant. In such cases, Lavrenti Pavlovich acted promptly. He sent the girl or woman to the appropriate clinic, and there the specialists would decide on the question of abortion. Trial. In the early 50s, in the life of Lavrenti Pavlovich Beria began to fall on hard times. Time after time, facts began to surface that pointed only to illegal actions of the man up to crimes on a wide scale. Eventually, in the course of the trial, raised the question of Lavrenti Beria's relations with female representatives of the female sex. The accused only said that he easily found common language with Soviet ladies and held meetings with them in his office. All that would be nothing, but there are two key points. First, the statesman regularly abused his official position and thus crossed the line of permissiveness. And secondly, to many girls and women, Beria used physical influence against the will of the latter. In December 1953, in respect of Lavrenti, Pavlovich was applied to the highest penalty, firing squad. The man was found guilty under the articles of espionage and conspiracy against the Soviet power. Conclusion. Thus, Lavrenti Pavlovich Beria is considered one of the most controversial personalities in the era of the Soviet Union. And although he had high positions, this did not save him from illegal actions. The statesman abused his official position and also cheated on his legitimate wife with a large number of mistresses.